Hey there, wake up. It's Means Morning News. Just after 11 a.m. on the East Coast, I'm the newsman, Sam Sachs. Look at us, spending another Valentine's Day with each other, joined together once again by the bonds of love for anti-capitalist news and analysis. Don't tell my wife. Riffing from the Oval Office on Thursday, President Trump actually proposed a remarkably good idea. He said he wanted the US, Russia, and China to all commit to slashing their defense budgets by 50%. Take a look.
The first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia, and I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half. And we can do that. And I think we'll be able to do it.
Okay. Sure, let's do it. Now, as much as I'd like to see this actually happen, it is my responsibility as a newsman to tell you that this is in all likelihood bullshit. Because literally 3 days ago, Trump said he wants more military spending, and in Congress, lawmakers are advancing Trump's agenda with a budget that also increases military spending. So, let's chalk this one up to just another episode of a 79-year-old whose brain is turning to mush. To the extent that there is some clarity there, though, the call to cut defense spending is likely out of fear of China's rapidly growing military. It's probably in the best interest for the US to call for disarmament, just as China is reaching the point where it can eat our lunch. Also, Trump's call to cut defense spending doesn't comport with his other calls to pursue imperialism, from Gaza to Greenland to Panama. He literally said he wants the US to expand its territory in his inauguration speech. And this week, President Trump's special envoy to Latin America threatened regime change in Cuba. Mauricio Claver-Carrón made the eyebrow-raising comments during an interview with Politico. He claimed, quote, "The Cuban government is probably at its weakest point that we've ever seen. People always say that, but this time it really is. And the desire for change of the Cuban people is overwhelming. Even its leadership structure knows that change is inevitable." When pressed by the interviewer if he meant regime change and what role the US would play in that, Claver-Carrón said, quote, "Oh, I think we can be very creative, and I'll leave it at that." Of course, over the last 60 plus years, the US has been trying all sorts of creative ways to topple Cuba's communist government, from the Bay of Pigs invasion to the hundreds of assassination attempts on Fidel Castro to the never-ending embargo. Already, the Trump administration has ratcheted up tensions with the island. In his final days in office, President Biden removed Cuba from the state sponsor of terror list. Trump, however, in his first week in office, put Cuba back on it, proving just how meaningless the list is since Cuba doesn't sponsor terrorism. Trump's Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is a huge Cuba hawk, and earlier this month he called Cuba, along with Venezuela and Nicaragua, quote, "enemies of humanity." So, yeah, very clear this administration is not going to cut the defense budget in half. Next up, with President Trump's new pick to lead the Bureau of Land Management, you might as well call it the Bureau of Land Exploitation. Trump tapped Kathleen Sagama to lead the agency. She previously worked as a fierce advocate on behalf of fossil fuel interests, leading the Colorado-based Western Energy Alliance, a trade group for the oil and gas industry. The Washington Post noted that Sagama has advocated for the Bureau to prioritize oil and gas drilling, hard rock mining, and livestock grazing on public lands nationwide. She was actually interviewed by the Post last year after President Biden ordered BLM to place conservation, recreation, and renewable energy development on equal footing with resource extraction. It's when it comes to public land management. Sagama threatened to sue the administration over the new policy, which is now likely to be rescinded under Trump. The Center for Biological Diversity reacted to the nomination in a tweet about Sagama that read, quote, "She's a fossil fuel industry hack with breathtaking disdain for environmental laws, endangered species, recreation, or anything other than industry profits. It's hard to imagine how Trump could give a bigger middle finger to America's public lands." As head of BLM, Sagama will oversee 245 million acres of public land. That's about 1/10 of the U.S. landmass. And she's going to turn it all into a playground for extraction capitalists at the expense of future generations' ability to enjoy the land. And finally, the odds of a large asteroid hitting Earth in the year 2023 just ticked up to 2.3%. The space rock known as 2024 YR4 was first discovered last December, and it was calculated to have a 1.3% chance of slamming into the planet. Since then, further observation has raised the probability to 2.3%, which might not sound like a lot, but when the risk is an entire city getting wiped off the map, well, you got to pay attention, especially if the odds keep going up. Astronomers hope to have a better understanding of the asteroid's size and track after the James Webb Space Telescope takes a look at it in early March. The European Space Agency released a statement that read, quote, "The chance of impact is very slim, and the asteroid is small enough that the effects of any potential impact would be on a local scale. But the situation is significant enough to warrant the attention of the global planetary defense community." The good thing is NASA has already been practicing for this exact scenario. In 2022, the agency conducted its Double Asteroid Redirection Test, or DART mission. It involved launching a probe directly at an asteroid 11 million kilometers from Earth, known as Dimorphos. And it was a success. The impact changed the asteroid's orbit, proving that it's possible, with enough warning, that NASA could knock an asteroid off its collision course with Earth. Then again, by 2032, NASA will have probably been stripped bare by private space capitalists like Elon Musk, in which case, we'll just have to rely on China's space program to save us. Look, just because it's a day for lovers doesn't mean we can't hate. It's time for this week's Rich Dicks. Thanks for all the nominations on Blue Sky. Here's a good one for Joe Rogan, who's been simping for Elon Musk all week. Rogan has claimed that since Musk is so rich, he can't be corrupted, so no one should worry about what he's doing at Doge. My dude, are you familiar at all with how oligarchy works and how pervasive corruption is within it? Read a book, Joe. Here's a nomination for Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith and Bill Hagerty, who've introduced legislation to make it easier for landlords to evict people, and faster. Because that's what we've all been clamoring for. Not healthcare or lower prices, but easier evictions for landlords. Disgusting. And finally, here's a nomination for OMB Director Russell Voigt, the guy trying to cut off already appropriated funds that go towards stuff like cancer research. Funding that his family benefited from in the past that he wants to make sure families in the future can't benefit from. Because the administration needs to find money to fund tax cuts for the rich, after all. What a scumbag. Thanks for all the nominations. In the end, though, someone else is getting the dishonors. This week's Rich Dick is Linda McMahon. Thanks to Goal Monitor Adam on Blue Sky for the nomination. And I agree, it is hard to argue against Musk getting it every week, but in the interest of mixing things up, let's just go with McMahon. She is the latest billionaire on track to join Donald Trump's cabinet. She is nominated to be Education Secretary, and if you're wondering how being a professional wrestling executive qualifies her for the job, well, it's because she's been tasked with destroying the Department of Education. Trump has made no secret about this.
How soon do you want the Department of Education to be closed?
Oh, I'd like it to be closed immediately. Look, the Department of Education's a big con job.
Well, with that in mind, McMahon faced off with senators this week for a confirmation hearing, and it was a bizarre event in which McMahon was asked to make commitments about how she would lead the department, even though everyone was aware the plan is to shutter the department. In other words, it required more than a little kayfabe from the WWE executive. She pretended that she's interested in improving education in the country when what she's really interested in is diverting the billions of dollars in federal support for public schools that come from the Department of Education, diverted to profiteers instead, who want to get rich off giving kids a substandard education. Here she was laying out her vision for returning education to the states.
The president has given a very clear directive that he would like to look in totality at the Department of Education and believes that the bureaucracy of it should be closed, that we should return education to our states to make sure that the education that our students are getting are the ones that is best for them. It's not one-size-fits-all education policy throughout the country. Governors have taken great strides in implementing school choice, making sure that schools have the funding that they need.
That's something that might sound good to someone who has no idea how the education system works. First off, the one-size-fits-all curriculum that she mentioned doesn't exist. The federal government does not set curriculum. State and local governments do. Second, she wants to return education to the states. Okay, well, state and local governments already fund 90% of education, and it's a reason why a lot of schools are failing. State and local governments have pursued tax cuts for the wealthy, which deprives funding from schools. The Center for Budget Policy and Priorities recently reported on 26 states that were cutting personal income taxes, corporate taxes, and property taxes, estimated to cost $126 billion over the next 10 years. The report states, quote, "The tax cuts, most of which are both permanent and tilted toward wealthy households and corporations, will weaken state revenues by large and growing amounts over time, limiting these states' ability to maintain support for schools and other vital public services." Schools simply do not have enough money, which gets us to the third point. McMahon touted governors implementing school choice programs. These are initiatives in which money that is supposed to go to public schools is instead given to parents to send their kids to more expensive, for-profit, private schools. According to an analysis from the Education Law Center, these voucher programs, as they're known as, increase the cost of education by between 11 and 33%. And if implemented across all 50 states, as McMahon wants, would increase education spending by between $66 and $203 billion a year. And maybe it'd be worth it if these programs actually improved education outcomes, but they don't. Because ultimately, a good chunk of that money isn't going to teaching kids, it's going to profits for the private school company. The National Coalition for Public Education, or NCPE, cited long-term studies on the effect of voucher programs in Louisiana, Indiana, Ohio, and Washington, D.C. And what was discovered was that voucher programs had a devastating impact on children's learning, an impact even worse in some cases than natural disasters can have. You can see in this chart, voucher programs in Louisiana and Ohio resulted in more learning loss than when schools were shut down due to Hurricane Katrina. And here's why, according to the NCPE, quote, "Voucher programs mostly fund failing, low-quality private schools that pop up and eventually close. These subpar schools are propped up by taxpayer-funded voucher programs that allow them to continue operating for years despite providing a poor educational experience, such as teachers lacking certification, questionable curricula, and crumbling facilities. With little to no quality controls and high turnover and instability, students' performance suffers." But hey, a lot of CEOs will make a lot of money off it though, and that's the whole point. The Department of Education plays a crucial role not in dictating curriculum, but in providing support and protection to groups of students that were historically denied education or discriminated against in schools before the department existed. For example, Title I provides $18 billion in funding to schools in disadvantaged areas where tax revenues aren't enough to keep schools open and hire teachers. And the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, funnels $15 billion to help educate students with disabilities. As part of the plan to eliminate the department, McMahon proposed moving IDEA to the Department of Health and Human Services. Take a look.
What department do you suggest would then administer that funding,
Which funding?
the special education funding?
Special education, I think it could very well go back to HHS, where it started.
All right, so I just want to be clear, you're going to put
But that-
special education in the hands of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, the guy who's devoted his life to lying about autism should be in charge of education funding for students with disabilities. The Department of Education also has an Office of Civil Rights that investigates and takes action against discrimination in schools. McMahon proposed moving that office to the Department of Justice instead. Then she said that private schools, again, the sorts of institutions she wants to see play a greater role in the education system, should be allowed to discriminate based on race, gender, disability, however they see fit. Even perhaps private schools that receive federal funding through those voucher programs.
So private schools should not be able to turn away a student with a disability or a student based on their religion or their ethnicity or race.
Well, private schools aren't taking federal dollars.
But I'm
So
saying-
they have the ability to say that if they do not
They
believe
did
that they
receive them.
well, if
should
they
not.
believe that they cannot best serve that student and they're not taking federal dollars, then they have the right not to accept that student.
But I'm speaking specifically when we talk about, there's a lot of conversation about vouchers. If private schools take federal dollars, can they turn away a child based on a disability or religion or race?
Well, I think that there are also some public schools who are saying that they don't have the.
Really just a yes or no?
No, it's not. It really
Well,
isn't.
for-
McMahon refusing to prohibit discrimination even for schools that receive public money is great news for private school CEOs who don't want to pay additional costs to educate kids with disabilities. They can just deny those kids now. McMahon kept up the kayfabe under questioning from Christian nationalist Senator Josh Hawley, who tried to make the argument that the problem with education in the U.S. is, well, insert whatever right-wing culture war grievance you want. Take a look.
What can be done to ensure that these colleges comply with the law and that women are safe on campus and that women are able to play sports without men interfering? These universities are absolutely getting federal funds from this department, the department that you're going to run if and when you are confirmed, and I believe you will be. Will you investigate those universities and give them an ultimatum? Either they need to comply with the law, they need to follow the law of Title IX, they need to follow the rules issued by this administration, your department, or no federal funding. I mean, will you make sure that the law is enforced?
Yes, we will make sure the law is enforced.
Will you make sure that Jewish Americans are safe on our campuses, for heaven's sake, and these crazy students who are committing crimes, breaking windows, smashing into buildings, trapping Jewish students in libraries, will you make sure that this stops on our college campuses that are getting all of this federal tax money?
Absolutely, or face defunding of their monies.
Will you see that those students, that their visas are revoked and they are sent home and they're not allowed to stay on our campuses under cover of our laws, committing crimes and threatening our own students? Will you return some common sense to our campuses in this way?
Yes.
Ha! Well, I guess she found a role for the Department of Education after all, enforcing discrimination against trans people and attacking the free speech rights of college students, including deporting them for pro-Palestinian activism. Suddenly, McMahon envisions a very muscular Department of Education implementing right-wing culture in schools. Guess we're not going to give that job to Robert F. Kennedy or the Department of Justice. Several other Republicans on the panel picked up on Josh Hawley's line of questioning, urging McMahon to protect kids from so-called predators in school. But not a single Republican brought up the fact that McMahon herself is being sued for failing to protect young kids from sexual abuse. This is the Ring Boys scandal, in which a former WWE employee named Mel Phillips recruited young boys to help set up the wrestling shows and then sexually abused them in all sorts of disturbing ways for years. And according to the lawsuit, pretty much everyone at WWE, including the McMahons, with Linda and Vince, were aware of what was happening and did practically nothing to stop it. I'm going to read directly from the lawsuit here. Quote, the WWE and McMahons knew about Phillips' sexual abuse of ring boys, but did not take any measures to prevent it or to protect the young boys. Instead, for years, they knowingly allowed Phillips to use the allure and stature of being associated with the WWE to lure, recruit, groom, and sexually abuse numerous underage boys. You're telling me that not a single Republican who's been shrieking about protecting kids in schools is at all concerned about this? Not one? Once again, pedocon theory holds true. Getting rid of the Department of Education would be catastrophic for millions of families that rely on programs funded by the department, while worsening the problem of states underfunding schools. But Linda McMahon is a billionaire who will never have to worry about sending her kids or grandkids or however many kids down the family line to an underfunded public school in a disadvantaged neighborhood. And that makes her the perfect candidate to execute the ruling class's goal of turning the education system into yet another racket that turns a profit while degrading services. Even if she's an actual danger to children, they don't care as long as she executes the mission. And for that, Linda McMahon is this week's rich dick. One last reminder, please send us some sunnies. The email address is below, submissions@means.media. Today's show ends with a sunrise from Virginia. It was sent in by Ted in Charlottesville. Enjoy. Thank you, Ted. Show's over. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the team behind the scenes. Please sign up for Means TV if you haven't yet. Also subscribe to our YouTube and podcast channels, and follow us on social media. One day capitalism will fall. Until then, we're going to be right here. See you next week.